Hi, neighbor. Welcome to the We the Community podcast. I'm Amanda, your host, or AZ for short, and I have been eagerly waiting to release this episode of We the Community. You and I are going to dive into a conversation with Jen Guzman. I met Jen through Change Collective, and she became a fast friend, mentor, and one of my favorite people to talk about life with. We're going to jump into so many different topics, including how to stick to your core values, the importance of keeping people's humanities at the forefront of conversations, and how to be intuitive about your change work. Now, I want to provide a disclaimer here. This episode is coming out during the backdrop of the LA protests, the ICE raids, and the No Kings protests. I want to make a few things abundantly clear as we listen to how to work across the aisle on this podcast episode. Working across the aisle is something we need now more than ever to ensure that all humans are treated with dignity and respect. But working across the aisle should never come at the compromise of that. The moment that we begin to build so-called solutions without seeing a human in their full capacity is the moment we failed. Because a core value of this podcast is that humanity is not a sliding spectrum. We are all fully human 100% of the time. In this episode, as I just mentioned, we will talk about what it means to work across the aisle, what is considered an aisle, and how we can solve issues together. Full disclosure, while Jen and I belong to the same side of that aisle, we have different opinions on various topics while mostly wanting similar outcomes. This goes to show you that working across party lines or even within party lines can also exist within your own groupings, and I'm excited for the impact that that message can make today. A little background on Jen. Jen is a thoughtful leader in Chicago's business community, known for her commitment to mentoring small and middle market businesses and her ability to drive transformative growth. Raised in West Rogers Park by a Mexican immigrant father and Jewish grandparents, Jen's upbringing instilled in her a deep appreciation for hard work, community support, and giving back, values that form the foundation of her leadership style. As executive director of Rise Chicago, Jen drives initiatives that are innovative solutions to the city's most pressing challenges, including public safety, education, economic growth, and fiscal stability. Her leadership centers on fostering civic engagement, building coalitions, and empowering leaders who share the organization's vision for a thriving, inclusive Chicago. Jen brings over 20 years of experience in human resources and client relations, where she has guided organizations through periods of rapid growth and transformation. She has successfully scaled teams, implemented strategies to improve employee engagement, and fostered thriving workplace cultures that deliver measurable business outcomes. As the founder of Bestola Collective, Jen collaborates with organizations to align their purpose with impact, streamline operations, and enhance people experiences to achieve sustainable success. Jen's commitment to community is reflected in her leadership roles across Chicago. As HR Committee Chair for the Chicago Community Loan Fund, she stewards nearly $200 million to support local businesses. At Poder, she played a pivotal role in securing $6 million to establish the city's first immigrant integration center in Gage Park. She also serves as vice president of the board for SUM, advancing initiatives to uplift and empower communities citywide. These efforts earned her the 2023 Outstanding Volunteer Award from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And as a proud Chicagoan, Jen continues to channel her passion and expertise into creating lasting change, ensuring that Chicago remains a world-class city for generations to come. Let's welcome Jen to the podcast. Jen Guzman, thank you so much for being on We the Community podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
First and foremost, super excited that you have launched this podcast, and this will be a gift to everybody. So thank you. Yes, I play multiple roles aside from being a Mexijew from West Rogers Park in Chicago, Illinois. I am the founder and CEO of Bastola Collective, really bringing humanity back to business and leadership in the communities around us. And then Rise Chicago is a nonpartisan coalition of leaders driving a common sense agenda in the city of Chicago. Super excited to be here with everybody and very excited for our discussion.
So let's back up. Tell us what a Mexijew is.
A Mexijew is, so I am Mexican and Jewish. My mother is Jewish and my dad's side is Mexican. So we bake this little, brisket taco or spicy matzo ball soup, caldo de matzo ball soup. And this is the product of the Mexijew mixture.
I love it. I love it so much. And so that obviously has a lot of intersection. Obviously that shows up in your spicy matzo ball combination of a person, but also can you talk a little bit about how these intersections show up personally, professionally, in your community? Just kind of a little bit broader about how those things come up for you.
Quite the intersection. And look, vulnerably, as a kid, and even into my adult life, there's a line in Selena, I promise I didn't steal it from the movie, but Jennifer Lopez, who plays Selena, really said it so well. You're never Mexican enough for the Mexicans. You're never American enough for the Americans. I felt that same struggle growing up. I was never Mexican enough for the Mexican family. I was never Jewish enough for the Jews. And now I'm like, wait, instead of this, and actually I'll make another reference. I think there was a podcast, it was Becky G, who said, I'm 200%. I'm not, it's not, I'm either from here or not from here. It is, I'm from both places, and both places, I'm representative of both places at 100%. So I'm 200% versus being 50-50. And so I'm starting to lean into that. And the intersectionality is that I realized, a couple of years ago, I started doing more work. I call it root work, really asking more questions, diving into the stories of my ancestors more, including going to Mexico frequently, where I ask questions of my cousins. So my dad's parents are on the Mexican side, unfortunately passed away before I was born, but I have a lot of cousins who still grew up with them. And I started to ask stories and learn more about them and learn that my grandmother Bartola was a tough cookie and a healer and the village doctor. And she was like so generous and always put everybody else before herself. And my grandpa Victoriano was like the jokester, always had a funny joke, was always silly hearted and goofy. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm all of those things.
Yeah.
And then started just, I always loved and admired the stories of my Jewish grandparents. And I had the privilege of being raised by them as well, because they lived 4 blocks down from us. And so they were very much a part of my upbringing. And when I started connecting both of those stories together, I realized I'm like, gosh, we're so much similar at the root than we are different. And I started to be more outspoken about that. Like Jewish people and Mexican people, so resilient and just so much pain in our histories and struggle in our histories, but also resilient and still continue to find so much joy and life and celebration in the present moment. And it's just, it's unlocked a lot for me personally. And I take a lot of joy in sharing those stories and also asking people now in my community, whether that's geographic community or community of people that I'm a part of, and asking more about their stories and getting people to talk about their stories. All I want to do when I talk about bringing humanity back to leadership as part of Bastola is just get people to see each other at a human level versus what you've achieved, what your title is, what power you hold. Your power is in your story and the roots and where you come from. The power isn't in tying your worth to achievement. Your power is in your humanity, not all the stuff that we layer on top of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we're going to talk a lot about humanity and a lot about working with each other with the intent to find that humanity within one another in this conversation. But you said something about connecting with your roots and connecting what is similar and different about both your backgrounds. And I think that that is like a real superpower to be that 200% versus being that, oh, I'm 50-50. I want to ask, I think as women, we think we have to divide this 100% up into like 10% this, 5% that, and we can't be 200, 300, 400, 500% of something. So I want to ask, as an antidote to this conversation, as you're growing in your career, grew and are still growing in your career, can you talk a little bit about it from maybe that angle of being a woman and having these ambitions, but also like coming from this background of being these two different things that have kind of conflicted and come together throughout your life?
I realize that as women, and I'll speak for myself personally, I've been exhausted because I am playing 100% of my professional or career role while also playing 100% of myself as a person and a human, and in dealing with human things, right? Whether it's my journey to motherhood, my healing journey and therapy and things like that. And I realized like you can't be two people at one time. You could be one person with different roles within that one person. So I'm actually learning that right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do I be one person serving multiple roles versus being multiple characters in my story? And that was exhausting me. And so how you do that is leaning into who you are authentically, showing up as yourself authentically. I think oftentimes in a professional setting, we feel as though we have to look a certain way or act a certain way or polish ourselves. There was a former leader of mine, his name is Paul Saul. I'll give him a shout out, at Empower HR. I remember going into one of this private equity firm meeting. Gosh, it was like 10 years ago. And I put on like my best professional dress and heels and was super polished, and go to this meeting and I'm like super just on point, all the professional verbiage, blah, blah, blah. And we left there and he was like, don't ever do that again. And I'm like, what? And he's like, not be yourself.
Mm.
No one likes a not fun Jen. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just be you. And if people don't like that, then they're not your people. And that's okay. And
Right.
that resonates with me still 10 years later, because I realize there's a lot of ease and comfort in just being yourself. And when you're being vulnerable and authentic, opens the door for other people in your presence to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a balancing act, but you don't have to create this like shadow version of yourself to serve this outward role.
Yeah.
You can be fully you and authentic and real in your professional moments, career moments. And if people don't accept you, then they weren't your people.
Yeah. I think that brings up a really good point when you talked about opening a door for somebody else to be authentic. We're talking about change making work. And I think that that is super important because there's a level of building trust with the communities you work in and
Yep.
sub communities. And a community can be any size, it can look like anything. It could be sitting around your kitchen table with three girlfriends, it could be an actual community, like the textbook version of a community, like a municipality. It can be the community that you belong to because of your ethnicity or your race. It could be anything. And I think if you don't go into those communities with authenticity, especially if you happen to be an outsider from those
Mhm.
communities, then other people won't be authentic with you. And that kind of brings me to my first official question. So, when did you first know that you were meant to do change making work?
When I was like 5 years old. And I just realized this recently, in all fairness. I started to realize I'm like, when did I like to be boisterous and like talk to people and be on stage and all these things? I'm like, did I create this version of me? And I
Mm,
realized, no, I've always been this version of me. Like as young as 5 years old, maybe even younger, performing for my grandparents. And it's when you think about change making, it's not necessarily changing something tangible. It's changing the energy. It could be changing the energy. It could be changing the moment. I wanted to perform and be silly and outward with my grandparents to change their day from, maybe just working to having fun and enjoying,
mhm.
right? Like you don't think about those things. I would say as young as that. And I knew throughout school, I mean, in high school, I was a student council president. I did our Bengal news blast, which some people would tease me about, like being a nerd, but I'm like, who cares? I was there
Yeah.
because I enjoyed doing that stuff. I enjoyed being able to say, let me report the news in the high school today and maybe change how you approach your day. Like, you don't think about it as change in the moment. So I
Right.
would say I've always been this way. What I'm learning in more recent years in change work is that the majority of people are not comfortable with change.
Mm-hmm.
We say we want change because we're craving a different outcome of something because you're feeling some sort of discomfort in the moment. But then when push comes to shove, you actually don't want to do the work required of that change because it creates vulnerability again,
Yeah.
or maybe exposure for yourself. And so what I'm realizing is most people don't change until they're actually present in the pain. And so to be a change maker, you have to be able to be present in the moment and be honest with yourself and authentic with others around what's actually happening. So
Mm-hmm.
creating that little spark of desire for change. And what I'll say is the number one thing that is currently missing, in my opinion, from change work is something very simple: listening. And I'm like, time out. Have we just listened first? And I think where I would say would be the easiest step to take right now is to just stop talking and listen to one another. And
Mm-hmm.
then that starts to inform that change making work. I know that was a
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but
No, we're here for the long-winded answers. I think something you mentioned, I have this like scene in my head when you said I had the desire to change the moment. I think that that is just profound because if you can change the moment in a scenario that's tense or in a scenario that has the potential to maybe get out of hand or whatever it is, then you can change the outcome
yeah.
of what that is. And I have this like scene in my head from being a young girl voting for the first time when Obama was running. And just like the way that he would change the moment when something aggressive came about, whether it was in his favor or against him, and just watching the way he navigated the room to make sure that everybody felt comfortable in that space.
Mhm.
And so that's one of, and like when you said, I just figured this out, I just figured this out that I remember those moments during this election season. And I want to ask you if there is a moment where things start to get tense, and I can imagine in your capacity working across the aisle and having to be friends with every sort of Democrat and Republican, that you run into a lot of tense moments.
Yes.
Is something that you've done or you would like to do to relieve that tension in that kind of moment?
The second step in the change is listening, and then the power of pause, and then the power of choice. I'll give an example. I watched Trump's remarks, I think it was Tuesday night. And there was a moment where a young boy with brain cancer was being celebrated as being an honorary Secret Service member. But I found myself wondering, for the people that could not clap for that little boy, did you find pause in that moment to put your feelings aside to celebrate? And politics, this was not a political thing.
Mm-hmm.
This was, you have a job as a leader, and leaders set the standard. And I'm wondering how many people who didn't clap for that little boy that day are wishing they had made a different choice
Yeah.
in that moment, because that moment is now recorded in history.
Mm-hmm.
And those are those human pieces that people will not forget. They might forget your policy work. They might forget, maybe you forgot to respond to an email
Yeah.
and give grace. Where we couldn't find listening, pause, and choice in a moment for a child will be seared in people's, when it's an absence of humanity, people will not forgive and forget on those moments. And so I've been really actively trying hard to listen, pause, and make a choice. Do I want to continue down this path to either dissuade this person from their way of thinking, persuade them on my way of thinking, walk away from the conversation? There's a lot of times where I've traditionally wouldn't have bitten my tongue, where I have, because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
do I actually have the ability to change this person's mind in this moment? So shout out to Change Collective, because there was one section that we went through a couple of years ago in Detroit. In order to persuade, you must be persuadable.
Yeah.
And I sit with that moment almost every single day. And that's
Mm-hmm.
that listen, pause, and choice moment. Have I actually been open-minded? And that's what we need in leadership right now, is not talking at people. It's listening and saying, okay, I understand where this person is, and now I need to meet them where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And do I have the ability to do that?
Yeah. For those of you who have not listened, if you go back a couple episodes, we interviewed Dexter Mason, which is the executive director of Change Collective that Jen is talking about right now. And we talked to him about local leadership. So go back and listen to that. And that is the group that Jen is referring to that we were both a part of. And I believe I mentioned in that podcast too, Jen, I was talking to Dexter and I was like, I learned so many things in public policy school that I like didn't understand how they related in like the real world until your team explained them to me. And the one that you mentioned was the one that I brought up. And so that resonated with everybody then. Like, it didn't matter like what your background was or what your work is. Everybody can understand the intensity of disagreeing and like needing the pause. Vulnerably, like I literally just felt myself cringe when you said like Trump and like you brought up the remarks. Like I felt my body tense and I was like, okay, like she's going to make a point, like hear her point. And so I just want to be vulnerable and saying like,
Yeah.
it takes work even when you're chatting with a good friend, when you know that good friend's intentions are good or they're going to make a point, you're going to react to a word they say or something that comes up in a negative way. And you're going to like inherently want to interject or like not keep an open mind because you hear that one word. And to your point, I think that is something we need to move away from. As muddy as it is, we need to move away from it.
Yeah. And that's that listening piece. Most human beings listen to respond, not listen to understand. Right. And I think that's where we go sideways. And admittedly, this has been a journey for me, right? Like I was always, all right, I'm ready with my counter argument. Let's go. And now I actually listen to seek to understand. And I'm like, okay, I get where this person's coming from. Now give me a second. I can formulate my response. And it doesn't have, we can disagree without being disagreeable. It doesn't have to be contentious. Because at the end of the day, as human beings, I think most of us want the same things. We just might not agree on how we get there.
Yeah. I think that having your boundaries of what you're willing to discuss and what you're not willing to discuss is really helpful. And I think those look different for everybody, which is why at every level of change making work, there's going to be a different person that's in the right chair or in the wrong chair that needs to be doing the talking. And, some things we have to figure out in that puzzle. For me, where I draw the line is if you at any point make a suggestion that somebody doesn't have their humanity because of enter X reason here, or that you're not going to give somebody the benefit of listening to their story or something like that. Like that's where my personal lines get drawn. But maybe somebody who's more data focused and isn't as triggered by that can come into a point of the conversation where there are some offensive things being said and there are maybe some boundaries that you, the general you, have set in that way that that person can look past that and be like, I'm good. I can ignore it. I'm a numbers person. I'm a data person. I'm going to come to you with this argument from a different point of view. And I think that's where we all need to like lean on each other and learn from each other's pieces of strength and maybe pieces of weaknesses to be like, I'm tapping you in, like you're up. Like Jen, I did the best I could. You've got the voice of reason. I'm tapping you in, you're up. And I think there's like this dynamic of teamwork that has to exist in that space. I want to talk about working across party lines and I want to talk about what you're most passionate about in that way. But working across party lines, I want to preface is not just political party. Sometimes you work across party lines or work across the aisle in religion, in gender, in race. You can work across the aisle on the same side of your aisle. Like Jen, I know you and I have had discussions about how we view things differently, although I think we're more the same than we are different. And so I just want to preface as you go in and you explain all this work to the listener that working across the aisle doesn't always have to be like the traditional dictionary definition of that. And so with that, I want to ask you, how often in the work that you do you find yourself having to reach across the aisle in those things you're most passionate about?
All the time lately. And actually, I enjoy it because it's like a workout for your brain. It's a workout in emotional intelligence, in empathy, in listening. I see it as a challenge. If somebody disagrees with me on a topic, I see this as an opportunity to really put my leadership tools and development into play and see if I can actually understand and actually find a common ground with those people. And I think, transparently, so for example, I think generation to generation things differ. And I found myself oftentimes my dad will say something about a political thing and I'm like, well, you don't know. I'm doing this work. You don't know any differently or any better than me on this. Why do you think you know this better? It was contentious, right? Because it's safe. It's your parent, right? You're
Right.
going to fight with your parent. And then I was like, I'm not even listening to him. And I have the ability to now practice with my own dad in my own house before I hit the streets doing this stuff, right? And I'm like, and I'm not following my own rules. Why
Yeah.
is that? And then you also are like, wait a minute. Here's also an opportunity to educate on things and inform and create awareness. Um, One, do it in your own homes. I often feel that there are people who want us to be divided
Mm-hmm.
versus united. And so pinning us against one another lets this other power win.
And it's a
Again,
tactic.
it's a tactic. And I'm like, imagine telling somebody close to you, because of who you voted for, you're no longer invited to Christmas. And 2 months later, that person has a stroke or a heart attack and suddenly dies.
Mm-hmm.
You've now given up this relationship for what? Who wins in that moment? And so I approach these conversations often with that. Like if somebody disagrees with me on social media, and if someone's disagreeing, I will DM them and be like, you want to grab coffee sometime and talk? Let's do this in person. I'm
Yeah.
open to doing it. Sometimes people accept the offer and sometimes they don't. But I'm like, if I'm going to be this passionate and you're going to be this passionate, let's grab a cup of coffee. What's the worst thing that happens? We have a cup of coffee, we still disagree, but we were still able to see each other as human beings. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think has been lost. I don't understand why quite yet. Our character, our how we show up in the world, all of those things is who we are. So I'm like, if you make a voting choice, but you're a really good human being, why would I erase all the good things about you as a human because of who you voted for? Now, if you made a voting choice and you're also a shitty human being, you're
Yeah.
racist, just a bigot, all of these things, you're a criminal, whatever. All right, then I get it.
Yep.
And I'm like, why are we erasing people as a great person because of a choice they made?
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, that's like, I encourage people to like understand your own rubrics. That's something this election season, I really had to like sit down with myself and be like, what's my rubric? Like, I think that there is some truth to like people who voted a certain way, like just like have new voices now because we've given that
Yeah.
voice power. But I've realized that like in the anger and like being scared, I'm a nonprofit worker, I'm a woman, and those aren't even the most intense intersections that are happening right now that are at risk. I had to like sit down and be like, okay, what's my rubric? Like, where are the lines being drawn? And I realized that my rubric is based on how you live your life. And I think that to your point, is the important piece, is like, if you exhibit these things in your day-to-day life, like, I'm good, we're done, that's fine. But like, if that's not how you live your day-to-day life, then I have to believe that there is an alternative reason than maybe the most intense humanitarian reasons that you did what you did or voted the way you voted or however. And I think that's where things have gotten really intense, is like, I think a lot of what's on the table are just human rights issues. And I think that's where the friction is. It's no longer like a political issue. I think a lot of things are just human issues. And that's where things are kind of like rubbing shoulders in the wrong way. But to your point, I do think there's a level of like, okay, like, I think we just haven't talked enough and listened enough to like understand that there is like a solution at the end of the proverbial tunnel. And when there is, we haven't put aside our team hats in a way to make it happen, i.e., the immigration bill last year, some infrastructure things that, were on the table that got taken off the table. I think it's about kind of like getting over yourself a little bit, but that is like an institutional thing that has to happen. It has to be every individual getting over themselves in a position of power, not just one or two, because we need a movement, not just one or two people doing that.
Totally agree. And we're being pinned against each other. Social media is very influential in that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
concerned about the level of education coming out of social media versus
Yeah.
actually picking up a book to learn about these things.
Right.
And we're also trusting and not verifying. So if I know you
Yep.
and I trust you and you put out a bit of information, because I know you and trust you, I'm going to take your word as gospel. And you could
Mm.
be super wrong.
Yeah.
You have to trust but verify. And that's what we're skipping. And so people are making decisions based on unverified facts.
Right.
And it's becoming very dangerous. And that's why I'm saying just go grab a cup of coffee with somebody. Like,
Yeah.
have the courage to and it doesn't have to be someone you know.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you're getting into a Facebook or Twitter or Instagram back and forth with somebody, have the courage to say, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee and let's talk about this. I'd love to understand more.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that's getting skipped. And again, we're not looking at each other as human beings anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that concerns me greatly, because when do we turn that around?
Yeah.
How much further do we have to? That's why I say, going back to the beginning, I'm not convinced that people actually want to change, because it requires a lot of work. And it requires a lot of listening, and a lot of people just want to be right.
Yeah.
And they want to be heard, and they want to be seen. And so if that platform allows them to be heard and seen, whether they're wrong or right doesn't matter. They're just filling some sort of, I don't know, need, desire.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we could all do with a lesson in like the civil rights movement right now, because when I look at that movement and I think about what people went through to gain basic civil rights, and like the way that they had to show up day in, day out, put things on the lines, but like spend real time on the issue and having really tough conversations and putting themselves in harm's way, whether that was a verbal altercation or an actual altercation. Like, they wanted change. Like, that era wanted change, and we're still fighting for it, but we've made strides. And I think that we have to go back and like check our ancestors and be like, hey, how'd you do that? Like, how did we make that happen? Because like we're here again, and like we need your playbook. So,
and it's it was really funny a couple weeks ago, and it goes back to that human piece and relationships and trust. Like, you said trust at the beginning. I interviewed a couple weeks ago for Crime Lab, University of Chicago Crime Lab and City Club. I interviewed the former commissioner of Customs and Border Patrol under Obama, Gil Kurlikowski. And I asked just a very basic question. Like, did people, when you think about immigration reform, for example, we're on like 3 decades of lack of immigration reform. And I think a lot of people think that's an executive level decision. It's not.
it's not
Legislative, it's Congress, and Congress can't get it done. The reason they can't get it done is because they don't have relationships on both sides of the aisle. And so again, we're not looking at each other as human beings. We're looking at each other ideology versus ideology. And that's why the needle can't get moved, because you're going agenda based versus let's talk about this. Here's the outcome that we all desire, and work backwards to build the roadmap to that outcome.
Right.
And it's because we have a lack of relationship. So we continue to get stuck in the mud because we can't just have conversations with people.
Yeah.
And even in city council in Chicago, anytime I meet with an alderman, I'm like, do you have people around you in city council that you can go grab a beer with, or like lunch and hang out? Like in any workplace, you have friends at work.
Yeah.
The majority don't. And I'm like, light bulb goes off. No wonder we can't move ahead. Because there's no relationships. There's no trust. So of course work's not getting done in the way that it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a wonderful point. And I think that's a result of culture too, of just like the isolation that exists in our
Right.
culture. And now it's showing up in things that matter, like human rights, like, the way we treat immigrants, like all these other things. It's showing up in these ways that are no longer just like, oh, like I'm a little quiet and I prefer to be by myself. Now it's showing up in spaces where like people's lives are at risk, and we have to learn how to get back to like having those relationships. Because it's like one of those things, it's like eating your vegetables. Like, it may be really hard to like get up and have that conversation, but when you're like done with it, you're like, wow, that was like the best part of my week. So I think that's something we have to get back to.
For the record, potatoes, fries are vegetables. So fries were the better part of my week.
There you go. I love that. I love that. Potatoes count, French fries count, hash browns count.
Yep. Any fried potato counts.
Yeah, exactly. That's so funny. Something I've always admired about you, Jen, is that you're really intuitive, and you've worked really hard to find that in yourself. And so I want to ask, What can like working across the aisle physically feel like in your body? Like, what are some things that, for better or for worse, you can feel actually physically feel come up? And then once you feel that, how do you emotionally set yourself up for success when that arises?
Ooh, feel it in my gut right away if something is not going to be good. If
Hmm.
the conversation's going to go sideways, I would say I feel a tenseness in my stomach. I could feel my body get hot. Really centering yourself and grounding yourself so that you can be present to how your body feels in this moment, in these moments, I think is super important. And for a long time, I ignored that. And I ignored my gut instinct, or I ignored something that I knew was dangerous. Or I'm the reverse. I think I've ignored things that I knew would be a win. Like I could feel excitement generated and I didn't pursue that because I wasn't listening to my body or I was afraid to take a leap. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, we need to take risks again. Even if you're wrong, failure is not fatal. You make a mistake, you fix it. So in the last, I would say last 10 years, I've gotten really more comfortable making mistakes, taking risks, and definitely in the last several years, really just listening to my gut and
Yeah.
trying to go with the flow. And leaning into things. And I think if you can listen to yourself and you're into it, we all have the tools. We all mostly know what's going to happen in a situation. Like you have this inner knowing. You have to get grounded enough and quiet enough to actually listen to yourself. So going back to your topic of trust, the number one person you have to trust in any situation is yourself. And if you can't show up in a moment where you think you can be open minded, be a listener, be direct in your speaking, you wake up that morning and you know you just don't have it, lean into that, walk
Yeah.
away from it, reschedule the meeting. I mean, some things you can't, which I understand, but try to quiet yourself and find that pause, especially when you have a physical reaction, to really lean in to what the alarm is and informing yourself well to make a good choice in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that listening to your body is this thing that we hear in culture all the time now. Just, based on the pop of mental health and like the importance of that. And I think sometimes we don't always know what that means, but the way you just explained it, I think makes perfect sense. And as a leader and a change maker, leaning into if you're up for the task that day or not, there are moments that like we just got to go, right? You got to put on the face, you got to put on the whatever, the music that gets you pumped. You got to drink the coffee. You got to do whatever you got to do because it's time to go. But I also think there's a level of protection for yourself and the community you serve if you're like, hey, I'm not in a headspace to do this today. And I think there's an even bigger power of being like, but I know someone who is. And that's what goes back
I love
to
that.
the teamwork piece of knowing, hey, this one's not for me, but I care about the cause or I care about the goal enough to tell you that I'm going to appoint somebody else to do that, that I know is better suited generally or in this moment to get the job done.
I love that. I love that. I need to start doing that more. I swear,
Yeah.
Amanda.
We'll talk about that offline. No, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate you being vulnerable in that way. And to continue on that path, I want to talk about core values. So I know that this is something that makes working across the aisle really hard for people. When you feel that you might have to make concessions on your core values, what helps you draw that boundary with that conversation or in that situation?
I just won't. I will not bend on my core values. Integrity, honesty, authenticity, anything that takes me away from my core values is not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I love the other person, even if I'm whatever cause it is, attracted to that cause or rooted in that cause, if I have to change a core value for me, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
Because anything that's meant for you will never have you bend on that. And so I oftentimes in my life have bent boundaries to provide more for other people, show up when other people weren't showing up. Those are things that I've bent on that I'm getting better at. And
Mm-hmm.
truthfully, it's very uncomfortable for me because I'm a
Mm-hmm.
giver, I'm generous. But there's a difference between being generous and being a people pleaser. And I've now shifted away from being a people pleaser to being generous. And that doesn't always land well with a recipient who could be used to you being that people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
And it's uncomfortable for me. But if they're upset, that's on them, right? Their response to how I show up to something is their business. It's not my
Mm-hmm.
business. But anything that really, especially from an honesty, integrity, generosity, trust, authenticity, from anything bending on that, I just won't bend. And if I have to disappoint somebody, then I have to disappoint that person.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point to make. And I think if you could help people in this moment, if they're listening to this and they're trying to figure out what their core values are, and like I feel like we're talking about them in a broader way, like you said, authenticity, integrity, things like that. If you could help the listener right now understand how to build that out, where would you have them start?
What's the why? Here's an exercise I actually used to do with my team. It's a longer exercise. Simon Sinek has a find your why exercise. I have an exercise of how do you want to be remembered?
Mm.
And there's a book by David Brooks called The Road to Character. And in that book, David talks about how do you basically being eulogized being more important than what your resume looked like. And so when I think about how I want to be remembered one day, I want to be remembered for being a loyal friend, a great daughter, a great mother, a great sister, a great woman, someone who was courageous, someone who wanted to stand up for other people but laugh and have joy and not take things so seriously. So think about how you want to be remembered and work backwards. Or think about how you show up your best. What gets you most excited about how you show up in certain moments? And then take some snippets from that. Well, I showed up my best, most authentic self in that moment because I spoke my truth, or I was a really good listener, or I gave more of myself in that moment. And then you can tie that to trust, integrity, generosity, all of those things. So think about yourself more in character versus achievement or versus title. Look at your inner self, not something that you would post on your LinkedIn.
I think that sometimes we really run at something we think that we're supposed to believe in, and we don't know why. And it's not that we're not supposed to believe in it or we're not supposed to like be an ally in that space, but in order for us to like do justice to that space, you have to get to the why, or else you're just another person that's like a bandwagon fan of whatever you're doing.
Exactly. Exactly.
I want to ask, with you working across the aisle so much, what's your definition of progress?
My definition of progress is even if you move an inch, it's progress. Even if you walk away and move back an inch, it's progress. In order to have progress, you have to move. You have to have choice. You have to make a decision. Progress does not equal screaming at one another and nothing changes. That's not progress at all. To me, progress is not judgmental. It's all right, can we compromise on this decision? Or decide we can agree to disagree and walk away from this moment. But there has to be some sort of movement. It doesn't have to be massive movement. It doesn't have to be complete policy change, or it doesn't have to be even like changing the restaurant. Like maybe you change what you order at the restaurant, whatever that is, right? It's just some sort of movement. And also not letting perfection get in the way of progress. My coach, Julie, would tell you, Julie's been my executive coach for many, many years. And she will tell you, I often want to get to that outcome so quickly that I forget the journey and the steps to get there. That's why I try to say, like, create the vision for yourself, but little steps. And it doesn't have to be an immediate change, but just make some decision about something and move forward or move away from.
Yeah. If anybody out there is thinking about how they can make progress in whatever they're working in, I think your example of, okay, even a step back is a step forward because you had the conversation, you check that thing off your list or whatever it is. I would just encourage you to continue to do that, because if you can prove that you're right about one thing, if you can prove that like, hey, you gave me a little bit here and I succeeded, here's the outcome, or here's where it would have succeeded, then that other person, maybe it's a boss and you're working within, a team. I think that if you can have proof of concept in these like little places one time after another, you'll get to that massive leap as long as you continue to show that you're going to show up, you're going to get that little bit of progress, you're going to make that little win, and then you're going to keep going. Because I think what gets lost in the stories we tell are those little pieces. We see that we went from 0 to 100 and we're clapping for that person that they achieved that, but like we're missing the place where they had to take 2 steps back, where they had to like
Yeah.
make that concession to get that thing, to work hard at the other thing so they could start putting the pieces together. And so I think if you can just move and tick forward ever so slowly, we'll get there collectively.
Yes. Even if you move backwards, go backwards to go forward sometimes. Start over. Don't be afraid to start over. I mean, there are people that make 3, 4, 5 different career changes in the course of their career because you start to learn a different tool set or toolkit or skill set or whatever. Just progress means movement at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that vein, right now, it's a very trying time in American politics. And I think at every level of American politics, and there is so much on the line right now. And so I really want to ask, can you explain in your own experience why to you it is so critical to work across party lines right now?
We're going to lose ourselves if we don't start to work together. And the biggest, most important piece of this is that people are watching, and not just people, children are watching. And we are losing our sense of humanity from attacking one another versus working together. And again, it could be working together to say, we're not going to agree on this. We need to do all these other steps to even discuss this piece. But people are watching, and we're using our power in a negative way. We have so many gifts that we could be utilizing to set a better standard of leadership. We have set a lower standard and we're accepting a lower standard. We should not accept a lower standard because the standard is only going to continue to get lower because the people who are watching us, the young people who are the future leaders for us, are saying, well, if they did it that way, then I can do it that way. And I hear that a lot. I hear a lot of, well, we've always done it that way. Or my predecessor, these 4 predecessors did it this way, so I'm going to do it this way. And don't say that I'm wrong just because I'm doing it this way. And I'm like, have the courage to say, I'm going to do it a different way. Because clearly the way we've been doing it hasn't had a better impact or a better outcome. So I think it's, we're losing ourselves because we're not setting a great standard. And then we're just accepting what's given to us. I used to say when we started Rise, I said, the reason that we're broken at the local level is because we're broken at the national level. And then I realized it's the reverse. We have major foundation cracks at the local level, and you can't build on a broken foundation. And we don't have a really great talent pipeline of leaders growing into national roles because we're not doing it at the local level because we're accepting a lower standard. And I've started to be very outspoken about, I'm not going to accept a lower standard anymore. And I'm going to hold you accountable as a leader. And if you can't have your feet put to the fire on this stuff, then leadership is not for you. Leadership is lonely. And especially at elected level, it's servant leadership. We do not work for you. You work for us. And until people can realize that elected leadership is a servant leadership role, it's going to be really, really hard to have any sort of progress on any side of an aisle.
Yeah. And that goes back to your why. If we don't have the right leaders that are in the seats because they have a solid why and their reason is, oh, I want power, or, oh, I want to be able to say what I want to say, or I want to be able to boss people around, like that's not a good reason to be a leader.
No, and by the way, there's some people who do this because for the money, right? I never thought about that, but
Me neither.
there are people who are like, hey, I never would have made 6 figures anywhere else. So I'm going to run for alderman or I'm going to run for congressman. Unacceptable. We're not here to be an experiment for you or to be just a paycheck. Leaders earn the right to lead. So if you're going to step into the ring or step into the arena, then you better be ready for the whole gamut. Otherwise, go get developed as a leader.
Yeah. I think that's why I personally am so passionate about nonprofit leaders running for office, is because they were never in it for the money. Like, I think that's why it never crossed my mind, because as someone who took a pay cut to go into that realm, I'm like, money. We talk about money is in service. That doesn't even, it didn't even cross my mind. At the local level, I know that national, there are some tricky things there, but I think that I'm so passionate about getting the boots on the ground to run for elected office, because those are the people that are like, I'm here because it's been my why since, like you said, I've been 5 years old. So I think that that's really important to point out too, is what is the pipeline? Is it because your dad did it, or your mom did it, or your cousin did it? Or is it because someone told you you could in a moment you had to step up, and now you find yourself having to make that decision for yourself?
Or listen to your body. You know if it's a calling. Answer the calling. Something I've been working on personally is I don't want to be what people want me to be. I'm going to be what I want to be in terms of my character, how I show up, what I'm doing.
Right.
Oftentimes when I was a kid, my family would be like, oh, you're going to law school, you're going to be a lawyer. Why? Because I was good at negotiating or arguing, or who knows? Or I was talkative. I don't know. But I always had that, and I didn't do that, obviously, but I'm like, why should I be what you want me to be? I'm going to be what I feel is the calling for myself. So same here. I think there's a lot of people in leadership, not just elected or civic, but business leadership, that are in leadership roles currently that have no business being in those roles.
Agreed. And talking a little bit about how you want to be what you want to be, not what somebody expects you to be, that comes with a burden. And I know that you've experienced a little bit of that. So can you talk about how you deal with maybe hate from the opposition, whether that's digital hate or things that are said to you or phone calls you might get? How do you deal with that?
It used to really affect me. And I used to really worry about how I would be received. I used to really be afraid of being outspoken or making decisions at the risk of being rejected or abandoned. And the more work I do on myself and respect myself and love myself, the more comfortable I'm getting. Frankly, for some people who are like, oh, this person, who make a judgment of me without actually knowing me, you're lazy. Like, if you're going to make a judgment of
Do better.
do better. Like, at least attack me for something that I've actually done, or like, you know what I mean? Or have the courage to have a conversation with me. If you don't, I don't care. I'm finding my voice more because I feel like we need people with tenacity and gumption and courage to speak. And again, we do it at the risk of being wrong. But if we take no risks, there's zero progress.
Yep.
We continue to stay in the same place. And so, yeah, sometimes I think about, ooh, how's this one going to land? But then I go back to my core and I go back to my grandmothers and what they instilled in me, even though one of them I never knew in the physical sense. And I'm like, oh no, this is who I was born to be. And I'm going full in. If people don't like it, then I'm sorry, I'm not for everybody. And that's okay.
And how do you rest and recover in that?
I look to the crowd of people around me that want me to win. I know who wants me to win. I know who my cheer squad is. I know who my supporters are. I lean into those people and how they see me. Those are the people that matter. The people that love me, who care for me, who tell me, who give me real feedback about myself. Those are the people that I want in my corner. That's how I rest and recover in that, is surrounding myself with those people who see the real me and have an understanding of me and care for me.
Yeah. Do you have somebody in mind that you would like to share how they do that, whether it's positive or whether they say, hey, you can do better than that?
I have a lot of them, actually. I surround myself with truth tellers, people who give me feedback. Because if you really care about somebody, you'll tell them the truth about themselves because you want them to be better. Your real crew, your friends, your family are never going to let you look like a fool. And anybody around you that lets you look like a fool is not your person. But I will call out, I talked about her already, my executive coach, Julie. And Julie and I were talking a couple weeks ago. This was a really funny moment in synchronicity of the universe. I was talking about my constant need for striving for perfection and how I've been working actively on not tying my worth to achievement. Or if I walk away from something, it doesn't erase all the achievement I've had in that role and previously, or success that I've had. Because I'm ending a chapter doesn't erase the chapter from occurring. So we're talking about this and she's like, oh yeah, I'm the same way. That's why I keep this gremlin on my desk. And she shows me a little Ursula doll to remind herself that that need for perfection, that constant critiquing doesn't come from within us. It's external. So the very next day, I get an Amazon delivery that I wasn't expecting. And I open the box and she sends me my own gremlin. She sends me a Maleficent. Okay. But here's the craziest part. The very next day, my sister comes over and I hear her yell from downstairs because she sees the box. And she's like, where did you get this? And I'm like, Julie bought that for me. Why? And so I come downstairs and she had bought me, hold on, let me show you the whole box, a Jennifer doll.
No.
With a little briefcase, little baddie with her heels. And so it was like, here's the real me. Here's that gremlin or that hater saying, you're not perfect. You're not doing this well. All of those things. Like, it's that reminder that that noise is in your head, but it's not from you. It's generated by things around you.
Yep.
And so get yourself a gremlin that you could look at and be like, okay, Maleficent, I'm not listening to you today because I know who I am in here and I'm not going to let your noise get in the way of this.
Oh my God. That adds like a whole different spin on like pop culture's like your villain era.
Don't be your own villain. Don't be your own villain. There are enough villains in the world that you don't have to be a villain to yourself.
Wow. So if we want to go back to these situations where you have maybe the same outcome, but you have perhaps different steps to get there, how would you work through those checkpoints if you want to get to the same outcome, but have maybe different approaches?
I go ask for advice. I go ask people who are smarter than me on the topic. I used to be like, ego driven. I can do this on my own. I don't need help. But most of the time, those outcomes are not about you. And so go ask people for the steps that they took. You know, I'm at an age in my life where I've become a mentor for other people, especially younger women. But that doesn't mean that I'm at this point in my life where I don't need mentors. I was with a woman at dinner the other night who was in her 70s, and we were going around the table introducing ourselves and what we do and our role. And I introduced myself as a Mexiju again. But then when we got to her, she started with who she was and what her current role is. But then she's like, I've been married 4 times and I had a daughter at 16. And it was during a period of time where, unfortunately, I was raped. I was a victim of rape, but there wasn't something that I could do in that moment. So my daughter, you know, was my first child at 16, and her sharing her story in that moment, I was like, yes, keep telling stories like this so that women know that it's not a straight line to like career success or life success or love. It's like messy and the path changes and you choose a different path. You jump back and forth to another path. Like, and so I say this to say, she was like, call me anytime you need help. Cause I had said, I valued that you were so authentic in that moment. And so I'm like, I'm not assuming that I know everything. I have so much left to learn. And so when I want the same outcome or a different outcome, and I need to take a different path, I ask people around me for their advice or for their help or for their opinion. There's no shame in that. It's not, I have gotten more power lately in saying, I don't know versus saying I know, or I need help, or this is really hard. You know, Rise Chicago is something we've been at for 2 years, and I never gave enough respect to how hard fundraising is. I was like, oh, I've done all these other things in my life. Of course I can do this. And I'm like, holy crap, this is really, really hard. This is a different beast. So I started talking to different people about how do I get here, or at least saying that it's hard. And so I ask questions or I ask for help.
How do you navigate that in a way that involves social justice, politics, having to work across the aisle?
Sometimes I go ask a Republican, to be honest. I will ask somebody who I know has a different political set, because if you can understand the counter argument or understand the reason why somebody has a certain approach, I think you can come to a level of understanding and progress more quickly. If you are not anticipating that counter argument, it's going to catch you off guard when you're on the path. I'd rather know what I'm up against. And I shouldn't even say against, because I'm like, there are plenty people for me where I am politically right now on both sides of the center that I think in this moderate call it centrist if you want to label it, really align on I would say over 50% of things. But again, how we get there is different. So if we can understand each other and ask questions of one another, maybe somebody's a little more to the right of me or maybe a little more to the left of me, and anticipate roadblocks or counter arguments, like I said, I think it sets you up for better progress versus the blind side that you might get down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might learn something.
Mhm, mhm.
I go back oftentimes when I'm in that position to have to do that. I go back to a conversation you and I had. We were sitting at breakfast and we were talking about standardized testings in school. And we had very different opinions about what that looked like, not because we had different ideas of what the outcome should be, but because we had different ideas of how to get there. And the way that we worked through that and the way we both gave each other some space to like say the thing and then be like, oh, that's not a bad idea. Yeah. Oh, I totally get that. Like, I think it gave me this sense of my own power that I have the ability to problem solve and work through things. I think we look
Yeah.
at the opposition as like a very scary thing.
Mhm.
And in some ways it absolutely should be. I am by no means saying that like what we're dealing right now on a national stage is not scary and you shouldn't be scared. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is when you're sitting across the table from a friend and maybe someone who is in a position to create some change, it's okay to be like, okay, let's talk through this, and to give yourself permission and to empower yourself to have that discussion, because it can be a very scary thing, especially if you're in a position of like, I look to you, Jen, as like a mentor. And it's like, I don't want to upset my mentor. I don't want to like oppose her. You can work through that. It's very powerful.
It's an exercise for the brain. It's just an exercise. Think of it as working out at the gym. You're achieving another level, or not achieving, unlocking another level of resilience by having the courage to listen or think differently.
Last question on that. How do you bounce back from feeling that loss of power? Because inevitably that does happen, right? When you're in some heated moments. When you're in the midst of that heavy and often high tension situation, like what do you do to bounce back?
One, I don't lose my power anymore. I'm not giving my power away. That's how I bounce back. I used to think losing an argument or being in a heated discussion was me giving my power away. Me losing or being wrong or not being heard is not changing me. There's nothing that I've lost in that moment. And so it's a reframe. I'm like, oh, okay, well, this one's not going to work. We're not going to hit a middle ground on this. That's fine. I don't take it seriously. I sometimes take it so seriously that I feel like a piece of me is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on who the person is, if it's someone I care about, I always reflect on my game tape. This is something that anyone who's worked for me on any team knows, that I always review my game tape. And so before I judge the other person, I'm always looking at my performance first. Where could I have done better in this moment? And so I don't lose my power because I'm learning from the situation no matter what. And that's how I restore myself, is saying, all right, I'm going to give myself grace. But this is what I could have done better on. And if I think that I was in the wrong, I will go back in with that person and I will say, you know what? I didn't give you my best self in this moment. Or I didn't feel like I provided value in this moment. And I own it. I look in the mirror first. I take full accountability. The only thing that I need to challenge myself on lately is that oftentimes I take accountability too much, where I'm giving too much grace, where somebody actually did want to be a bad person or attack me or be lowbrow. And I'm like, well, I could have also done better in this moment. No, sometimes someone is just an ass and we just
Mm-hmm.
got to be real with it
Yeah.
and not take on that energy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so powerful, deciding not to take on that energy, because your energy has a currency. And if you
Yeah.
decide to take something internally, you don't know how it's going to affect your currency. And I think that's the hardest part, is you don't often know until like 3, 4, 5 months down the road how that thing affected how you see yourself, how you enter into negotiations, how you work across the aisle. And I think too, you said something, you said, okay, sometimes we have to admit that this one's not going to work out. We're not going to come to a compromise on this. And that goes back to aligning with like your core values. I will not, give in on this thing that's really important to me, but somebody else will. And I think that sometimes you're on the fifth, sixth, seventh conversation
Yeah.
and you're like, nobody is going to partner with me on this. I felt that way with friends. I'm
Mhm.
on my fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, like strong what I'm perceiving as a strong friendship. And then something just isn't clicking, it doesn't feel right, or I'm not getting that like sisterhood, let's say, that I'm looking for. And then it's like, oh, I'll never have that. And then some time passes and you meet someone and you're like, okay, like now
No,
we're
I have
here.
that.
Now we're here. And it's the same thing in change making. If you're coalition building, it's likely if coalition building was easy, everybody would do it.
Yep.
And so if you're coalition building and someone is not meeting you where you're at and you had high hopes for that person and that happens, next over, just keep going because it'll pop. Like someone will come to the table and they'll probably be better and more driven and more aligned than you could have imagined in the first place.
Okay.
So that's an
And it
encouragement.
could be somebody on the opposite side of the aisle.
And it could be somebody, it could be. And there's somebody that I had the pleasure of talking with, Dr. Dilara Saeed, who is the president of the Muslim Civic Coalition, but she works on legislation that unites what the Jewish community wants to see and what the Muslim community wants to see. And so one of those pieces of legislation was about diets in schools. And
Oh,
is
yeah.
there a kosher diet and a halal diet? Are all the students getting what they need in their belief systems? And she made that same point that you just did, is like sometimes we have different ideologies, but at the end of it, we just want the right diet for our kids. And that's something that, they worked on together and they found as
Yep.
a middle ground.
I've heard of that legislation. Somebody sent that to me recently. But that's, again, we think about the task or the goal as religious. But no, the goal that we've all decided upon is our children being able to have a diet that serves them while they're at school and then work backwards from there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I love that they teamed up on that.
Yeah, it was really inspiring to hear about. So when we look at across the aisle, sometimes we're looking at sectors too. So businesses, are you working across with, nonprofit to government to private? How do we communicate the needs that we might have in terms of financing a goal or an ambition to the business community when we need their financing?
I think we're struggling there. But what I'll also say, I think I said this a bit ago, we don't just have a leadership gap in civic leadership, we have a leadership gap in business leadership as well. And I'm very concerned about the succession plans for some of these businesses. And I don't think, again, I'll look at Chicago as an example. You used to have, call it the three-headed body of business, philanthropy, and civic leadership. And there were relationships between those three heads where Mayor Daley, for example, would call up someone in philanthropy and be like, hey, Pritzkers, I'm building this Millennium Park. We're going to put a really cool band shell in it. Or, yeah, I think that's a band shell. And you're going to pay for it. And we're going to slap your name on it, right? But they had a trusted relationship. They were able to do that. And I think we're missing those relationships today. And so I think the business community is ready to serve, but just they need to be told what to do and how. But before they can be told what to do, there has to be a relationship. Again, it goes back to relationships. We're not learning, right? We're not learning. We're not talking. We're just saying, you're going to do this for me and that's it. But you haven't earned the right to that phone call yet.
That's a great point. How do we speak their language in order to secure collaboration? You talked a little bit about building relationships, but how do we even get in the door?
Go ask to learn from them. Go ask what their goals are. Go ask how many people they employ in the city of Chicago, or if it was on a national level, nationwide. What's the culture of your business? The best way to create trust and authentic connections is to ask people about them.
Mm-hmm.
People like to share about themselves. So go ask questions about them and find out if there's a way that you can provide value first without demanding something from that group.
Right. Right. I want to go back to the idea of working with people who are alike. What do you do when you're realizing that someone who's supposed to be your ally on your side of the aisle feels differently and you're having trouble coming to that progress? How do you deal with an ally in that space or someone who is a perceived ally?
I think oftentimes as leaders, we surround ourselves with too many people who think like us because it's comfortable. I try to surround myself, or when I build a team, I build a team of people around me who aren't like me. Maybe one or two will be like me, but I include people who don't think like me. I'm a vision and execution person. I'm not good at the structure in the middle. So I surround myself with people who are structure people. who can help me execute faster. That's where I find myself the most successful, is assembling teams. If I find a disagreement with an ally, it's probably because I've set an expectation for that person that they should think like me. That's imposing an expectation on them. Why? If we're disagreeing on something, then it is what it is. Maybe I didn't fully understand that person, or maybe I held that person to a different expectation and didn't communicate that expectation. But I don't find myself in that position that often, because I find myself surrounded with people who are challenging me to begin with. So I'm just used to it.
Yeah. What do you do if it's in a space where you're trying to find a solution or make a policy change?
We go back to the drawing board. We go back to, what is the commitment to the change that we want? What's the outcome that we want? It's a different level of, we go back to inquiry versus working on it. Let's go back to inquiry. Let's start from scratch and find out, what's the outcome that we desire here? All right, then do we have the right tools, resources, training, skills, ability to build what we need to build? And if we don't, then we need to go back to square one.
We're going to go to final thoughts. So
Okay.
these are some quick fire questions, and they're something that everybody is going to answer in some capacity. So just the first thing that comes to your head: who are one or two leaders you most admire and why?
My grandfather, Solly Goldberg. Solly landed on Utah Beach, June 6, 1944. And he was one of the older people drafted during World War II. He was already 30 years old, had a wife, my grandmother, here at home. His ability to go to war, also liberate all of us, give us our freedom in the United States and around the world, see the death, terror, destruction of World War II and the Holocaust, especially as a Jewish man, and be able to come back here and live a life of generosity and joy, and was just an incredible human being, is an incredible example of leadership. And I used to think, my grandfather was a post office worker, then he retired, and then he went back to work 3 weeks later for Sidley Austin, which is a law firm here in Chicago. And he was like an administrative runner for 18 years up until 3 weeks before he died.
Wow.
He worked till he was 83. And that's what I mean. Like, we can't tie our worth to professional titles and achievement. This man was a leader more so than most people I know in my life. And I didn't used to think about it that way, because I wasn't like, oh, he wasn't a lawyer or a doctor, didn't have this major title. And I'm like, no, his ability to come back from war with the level of resilience and humanity that he did was leadership at its finest.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I think that probably speaks to your resilience and where you learned it from, and what's given you the capacity to lead the way that you have and will continue to do.
Yes, it has. Thank you. And
You're
lucky me for having that
Lucky you.
teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, where do you see yourself in this career of change making? What's next for Jenny Guz?
I'm going to use my voice for good. I'm going to continue to use my voice for good. I'm probably going to take some more courageous shots in some of those things that I would bite my tongue on traditionally. I'm going to rock the vote. I'm going to rock the vote and rock the boat.
Love it.
I'm
That's
gonna-
your tagline. Both of those things right there.
I'm going to be courageous. I'm going to be myself, because I know I'm not doing it in the spirit of my career. I'm doing it in the spirit of being a mother and working backwards from there. What is the type of example I want to set for my child? What's the kind of world that I want to create for her? And if I don't have a part in that, and I don't try something, even if I fail at it, if I don't try, then I have no reason to complain about it later.
What legacy do you hope to leave behind?
I just want to be seen. The legacy I want to leave behind is, when my child or my grandchild or both eulogize me someday, they say, my mom or my grandma took risks. She wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. She always showed her humanity first. The way she gave was, and the way she showed up in the world was an act of love. I think what people get away from, and this is why I'm so focused on this humanity piece, is change work, leadership, giving, even disrupting. Those are acts of love. It's because you love somebody so much that you want to be able to give a better situation or place or environment to that person. And that's why I'm like, if we have gotten away from that and we are leading with what I want to do for me, that's not leadership. That's not leadership at all. It's being able to say, I see humanity and I see a better path for all of us here. So I'm going to jump in. And if I fail, then it is what it is. At least I try.
We're going to clip this one day when
You're somewhere doing something real important. We're going to clip this for that. I think right now we're operating in so much fear. It's a very scary time. And I want to leave behind a message of hope. What is your message of hope for the future?
My message of hope for the future is that I'm more convinced there are people like us than not. The noise on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the spectrum, whatever you want to call it, is just noise. It's a minority. It's not the majority. If we realize that through shared humanity, shared situations, that we are all connected, there are more people like us. And that's where I find hope. That Mr. Rogers always says, look for the helpers. There are more helpers than I think we care to realize. Just watch for them. They're there. In the simplest of moments, somebody drops change on the floor, you help them pick it up. An older woman is carrying groceries up the stairs, somebody jumps in to help her. We're not watching for those moments enough anymore. And I'm not sure why, but I know that they're there. And that's my glimmer of hope every day.
That's very worthy. That's very worthy of hope. Last thing, where can people find and interact with you, your businesses, your missions?
The website is bestolacollective.com. Or you can find me at risechicago.org. Or you can find me on the socials at Jenny Gooz, spelled Gooz, on Twitter or Instagram. And it's just coffee. Let's grab a cup of coffee.
I love that. And lastly, we didn't get a chance to dig too much into this, and maybe this will be like a 2.0 with you, but can you talk a little bit about Poder and how people can interact with Poder?
Yes. So Poder is an immigrant integration community center in Gage Park on the southwest side, providing a 4-phased approach to workforce development so that predominantly Latino immigrants can have a better entry point into life in the United States. So it's ESL skills training on through workforce development. We currently place folks in banking and insurance vertical jobs right now, and we'll continue to build out those verticals as we grow. But it's also a resource center. It's a community center in Gage Park where it's a beacon of hope. People arrive here and they can go and find, even if we don't provide the service that they're looking for, we can provide them with a resource. And you can find us there at poderworks.org.
Perfect. And we will link all of that in the show notes and make sure we leave that on our socials. Jen, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom and light.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Hey neighbors, thanks for tuning in to the We the Community podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. It really helps us out. You can follow us on social media on Instagram at We the Community Pod for updates, behind the scenes content, subscribing to our email list, our book list, and more. Got a question, comment, or topic you want us to cover? Shoot us a message or email at wethecommunitypod@gmail.com. Until next time, stay curious, be kind, and keep listening. Catch you in the next episode.